optimizing WordPress. So if you're here for optimization, you're in the right room.
All right.
You got the floor.
All right, thank you. Okay, so this is optimizing the performance of WordPress. Okay. Make this thing quick. Okay, so first off, who am I? I'm Josh Highland. I have a degree in computer science from San Bernardino, 909 area. Founder of Newly Collabs. We're a web and iPhone app development studio. I've been using WordPress for about 6 years now, back to version 1.2.1. It's been a long time. I love social media. Please follow me at Josh Highland. And if you have any questions, I'm always available for there. Okay? So first off, what are we going to be talking about today? So the next section after this one is going to be about server-based performance, developing quick servers with TJ. So what I'm going to be focusing on is more the things that we can do that aren't server-based. We're going to cover some of that, but it's mostly going to be the WordPress side of things. Okay? So first off, we're going to be defining what we mean by performance. All right. Can you guys hear me now? A little bit better? Okay. Turn the volume. Sorry about that. Here we're going to talk about hosting choices, a little bit about the server configurations, of course WordPress plugins that are going to help speed things up, WordPress themes, the reason why your content might be slow, and finally tools that are going to help us along the way. Okay, so first off, what is performance? Dictionary.com says it's the manner in which something reacts or fulfills its intended purpose. In our context, we're going to be talking about how fast your WordPress site can deliver its content. Okay. Okay, what are some reasons for having a slow WordPress site? Your web host might not be the right web host choice for you. Your server configurations might be off. It might not be optimized in the way that's optimal for your site. You might have some plugins that are misbehaving. They're making too many queries. They're connecting to too many third-party services. They're just bogging everything down. Right? Also, we're going to be talking about themes. Not all the themes are created equal. There's some themes that out there that I've seen that do some pretty crazy stuff, and some ones that are really minimalistic. Right? And finally, the content that you put on your site is going to be good. Okay, let's talk about hosting here. So who here has a shared web host or knows that they're on a shared web host? Right? Most everyone here, because it's the most popular solution out there. Right? One of the reasons we use shared web hosting is we don't have to worry about a lot of the admin functions. We have an account. We log in, we upload our files, we use the backend of WordPress, we're good to go. Now, with a shared web host, you're on a machine with a lot of other accounts. So one of these other accounts might be doing something to the server that's bogging it down, and in effect, bogging down your site without you knowing it. So you can have an awesome, really minimal site that's still really crawling, and it could be because of somebody else, it could be because of the host, right? So, I'm not saying this is a bad solution, it's a great beginner solution. If you just want to put up something quick, the costs are relatively low. I mean, who's paying less than $10 a month for hosting? A lot of people, right? So it's a good choice. It's a good choice to get started with. Maybe covering some things that you can do with that, but your best options for performance are going to be with a virtual or a dedicated server. Now with this, it's exactly what it means. It's dedicated hardware. It's for you. Nobody else. This is your section. This is your server. This is all you. All the CPU, all the RAM, everything that's walled off for you. Plus that is you also get more storage space. So it's often located in a hosting facility, so it's not like a server that's in your house or something. It's still remote, but it's just walled off for you. And it can get expensive. I mean, we're talking upwards in the hundreds of dollars a month for one server. I have a dedicated server, and it's close to $200 a month. So that's a big difference. But also just moving from a shared host to a dedicated host, you're probably going to see some big performance gains right off the bat, but also it means that you're going to have some sysadmin responsibilities. Right? So you're going to have to be responsible for maintaining the machine and just the general day-to-day of it. So you may need to hire a sysadmin if you don't have a sysadmin background. Right? So there's more costs associated with it there. Okay, so when it comes to web servers, if you have a shared host, you might not have the option, you probably don't have the option of choosing what web server is going to be delivering your content. Okay, so Apache is one of the most popular web servers out there. You've heard of the LAMP stack. Apache is part of this, the A in LAMP. WordPress is designed for use with Apache. So who here is using a server that's not Apache? Okay, few people. Who's using one that's not IIS? Okay. Right? So Apache, again, very popular, and it's got a lot of tuning resources available too, because it's so popular. You can hire people out there that that's their whole job, is just to tune Apache. There's whole books dedicated to tuning Apache. So this is the first stop. Once you get past which server you're on, get a dedicated server, you start tuning out Apache. Like I said, TJ's going to be focusing more on the server side of tuning, so we'll just move on. The next server that I want to talk about is Nginx. So this is a really popular server it's faster than Apache, but it's not very popular. But it is, yeah.
Don't have an extra VGA to Mac adapter.
Back in this book.
Not the VGA to whatever.
I have one, as long as you don't need a mini.
As long as you don't need a mini. Mac keyboard. Best Mac.
Okay, so Nginx. Nginx is a web server that's faster than Apache. I find it harder to use, but it's used by big sites like WordPress.com and Hulu, so it's out there. It just requires a lot of tuning. So this again is a sysadmin issue. I believe it's, last time I checked, Nginx only has 6% of the market, so it is a small niche. I'm using it on a big client of mine, and we're seeing a lot of improvement just moving from Apache to Nginx. But the rewrite rules for URLs and those sorts of things are a lot harder to configure. So this requires some admin work, but just switching web servers can give you a boost in performance. Okay? And with both of these, it's important to keep things lean and only load the modules that you need. So when you get to this point of doing some sysadmin, you can load all kinds of modules. Modules are kind of like plugins for WordPress, if you can think of that. There's ones that'll, compress things, generate PDFs on the fly, zip things up. Just like WordPress, lots of plugins. You only want to load the ones that you need. Sure.
I'd like to suggest Lightspeed. I use Lightspeed, which is a great alternative to Apache.
Sure, that's another one. They're out there. Yep. Okay. Ooh. Okay. All right, good, thank you. Okay, so caching. What is caching? Are we talking about stacks of money? Yeah. We might as well because this is where the money's at, right? So what is caching, right? We need to define this first. Caching is remembering the result of an action and then using them again if possible. That's the simplest term of caching that I can come up with, right? So it greatly speeds up the performance of whatever you're trying to do. So you do an action, and then you hold on to it, and hopefully you can reuse those results in the future without having to recompute things, right? So this is going to reduce the load on your server because you're not having to recompute these processes over and over again. It takes something that's repetitive, makes it into something that we do once, we hold on to it, and then when somebody else asks for it, we kick it out, okay? And this is transparent to the end user. They don't know where it's coming from. They don't know that if it was everything got recompiled again or it came out of memory. They just know that the content got delivered. Okay? So what are some things that we can cache, that we can do, take advantage of this? Database queries, right? So something gets connected to the database, information gets pulled out of the database, we can hold on to that query, and then if somebody else needs that information, we can kick it right back out to them. How often do the pages on your WordPress blog change? Only when you make a post, right? How many people are hitting your site, right? So think about that. That's a big difference. Hopefully you're getting a lot of traffic. So those queries can be cached, right? The PHP code itself can be cached. We'll be talking about that in a second. Your page requests can be cached. So the whole page that gets built, we can hold on to that. It's not just the queries, but the whole contents of the page. Okay? Your assets can be cached. Your images, JavaScript, your CSS, the things that aren't your blog posts or queries. We can cache all of those. Okay? Let's talk about some query caching with MySQL. Right? So this is something that there's whole professionals on, there's whole people that base their careers off tuning MySQL, tuning queries, tuning query cache, right? So there's a lot of pros involved with it. Okay, it's easy to enable. just something in your MySQL configurations. Again, this is probably something that you need to do if you have a dedicated or virtual server. Probably something that it may be turned on with your shared hosting, but I wouldn't count on it. Right? Gives you instant performance gains. The second you turn it on, you set it up, you're going to start caching queries. So, like I said, somebody hits your page, gets a query. What are the comments? What are the posts? What are the pages? Because everything you do in WordPress is held in the database. So we'll get instant performance gains out of that. Okay, and again, this reduces server load because the server's not having to think about everything. Every request is going out, doing all those queries, pulling everything back. Okay, and the reason why you're not going to see this probably on a shared host is it affects everything on the server. So this goes across the entire MySQL install. So, say you have multiple blogs set up on the server. This is something that's server level, along with, say, Apache or Nginx or Lightspeed. It affects the entire server. So because of this, it's another reason to move to a dedicated or virtual server. Okay? But with every yin, there's a yang. So let's talk about some of the cons associated with caching. Right? It can be tough to tune properly. Like I said, there's whole sciences and schools of thought behind how much memory should be allocated, how things should be set up, how long things should remain in the cache, the types of queries that should remain in the cache. Right? And also right off the bat, it consumes server RAM. So if you set up query caching and you say, I want to cache 64 megs worth of queries and the results for those, that it sections off a section of the memory, and all of a sudden, it's dedicated to that resource, so that's less memory on your server that's dedicated to other things like your web server. Right? So that's one thing to be aware of, how many resources are available on the server. And again, this is where the tuning comes into play. How much memory do you want to allocate to everything else? My recommendation, if you really want to get into this, hire a professional. They're out there and they can really do a lot of great stuff. Okay. We talked about PHP caching, and specifically, I'm talking about opcode. What's opcode? Right? So we have readable PHP code. That's what we write. That's what's inside WordPress. That's what we look at every day. When we execute that, when we ask the server, hey, load this page up, it kicks it through a compiler. What the compiler does is breaks that down into opcode, something that's readable by the machine. Kind of think of like the Matrix, right? So it takes stuff that we can see, breaks it down into something that the computer can interpret. We don't have to compile it. We don't have to parse through it. We don't have to check the syntax. We don't have to do all this checking again. We can just pull it right out of the memory, right out of the opcode cache. Now there's some solutions for this that are pretty popular out there. I like eAccelerator. Again, this is something that's active at the server level, so this is something you're probably not going to see on a shared hosting. Right? Unless you ask them for it, sure. You know, you might find somebody out there that's doing it.
Well, I don't know the local hosting Valencia, and I'm just saying, hey, you got any accelerator? And I'll say, no. And I'll say, install. I'll say, yeah, well, no, why not?
Yeah, as I mean, you got to work with the host. You got to find the host that's the best solution for you.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you're with GoDaddy or something, I'm
No.
guessing they're not going to get that, right? So your server host does better, right? Okay. Okay. So yeah. Accelerated APC. Somebody was telling me earlier that APC might be part of PHP 6, something along those lines. I'm not sure. Okay. Now, so there's some pros associated with this, like we talked about. It's a huge performance gains, just like any other caching. We're doing the work once, and we're holding on to it, and we can use that over and over again. So the servers don't have to work as hard. Reduces the load. So you might have something that's high traffic, and anything you can do to cut down on the server is going to help. Sure.
Are these caching solutions, are like the accelerated APC, are those at the Apache level, or are these like WordPress plugins? What level are we operating on?
We're still at the server level right now.
Okay.
So these are modules that you can plug into Apache and Nginx, and they're at the server level, right? So we're still there, haven't moved on to the WordPress level yet. Okay. But again, there's some cons with caching. There's that balance. Again, this can be hard to tune, just like the MySQL stuff. There's people that spend their whole career just tuning servers, and it's good to get advantage of those people. Again, RAM usage. So you set aside a section of memory that's going to be dedicated to opcode caching. So with your MySQL, you say, I want 64 megs of RAM dedicated to my SQL caching, and I want 64 megs of RAM set to opcode caching, and you only have a gig of RAM on your machine, you just used up an 8 of the memory. So not too bad, but there's things to consider. Okay, so here is an example of what I'm talking about with the opcode caching. So you can see a request comes in, and in this case, APC is going to make a call to the opcode cache and say, hey, is this stuff that we're asking for right now, this PHP code, is it in the cache? If it's not in the cache, it's what we call a miss. And it's going to come back through and go through the compiler. So this area here is the compiler. It's going to scan it, it's going to parse it out, it's going to make sure all the language in it's correct. And that takes some time. And once it processes through and it's successful, it's going to store it back in the cache, and then it's going to execute. So the next guy that comes along and asks for that same PHP file, it's going to say, hey, is it in the cache? It is. That's what we call a hit. And then it's going to execute right away. So you can see that in this stack here, that there's a lot of steps in there. So by avoiding any of the steps in the execution chain, it's going to speed up what we're trying to do. So this is a look at eAccelerator's control panel. This is off my server here. It's pretty nice. You can see a list of the files that it's caching and the path to it. When it was added to the cache, when it was last modified, when it was added to the cache, the time that it's set to live, the size of the file that it's caching, the number of reloads, that means how many times it's been added to the cache, and the number of hits. So you see here we have 134. So I reset the server and let it run for about half an hour before I came in. And you can see that these files, for example, look at this nav menu here. It's 112 kilobytes, and it's been hit out of the cache 134 times. So that's 134 times that my server hasn't had to process that file. Right? So I think it's pretty evident. You can see what the benefits of that would be. Right?
What have you seen in performance gains before and after?
Before and after, I'm going to be honest, I'm not an expert in this, so it's probably not tuned as optimally as it could be. I'm hoping to gain some stuff from TJ's lesson session next. But you know, it definitely knocked off about half a second on some of my page loads. It really depends on what's going on. So a page that's heavy, like WordPress, where there's a lot of different PHP files that are being executed, you can see gains there. If it's a single page that's pretty light, there's not a lot of stuff going on it, you're not going to see that big of a gain.
So if you're doing caching from PHP to HTML page, like using super cache,
Yeah.
that's parsing and creating HTML files and hitting those. So it's almost the same as this, but we're not using HTML versus PHP.
Right.
However, this would be for server-intensive things that are always constantly updated. So
Sure.
for if you cache to HTML, it's not live data. It's not really coming from PHP. But
Yeah.
This would be coming from PHP.
This is coming from PHP.
My comments, really heavy.
Yeah.
So this is a really big site.
Right, so things like, say, something that isn't even visible to the user, like including the WP functions file, right? That gets included all the time, right? It's the guts of everything. That is something that gets cached, and every request is going to, when it asks to include it, it's going to include it from the cache.
Right.
So that's a part where it's going to get sped up. There's a question behind you.
Oh yeah, I mean you can use Lysol plugin or either net plugin from the
Yeah.
kind of the
We're going to be getting into that stuff. There's one back here?
Now, do you see sites that use a combination of say ATC or eAccelerator and super cache or back cache?
Sure, yeah, I use all those. As I get through this, I'll explain like my setup, but usually it's APC or eAccelerator. It's one of the choices back and forth. There's other caching engines out there.
And would they be used in conjunction with the native plugins like super cache or
Yes,
back cache? Okay.
yes, definitely. So I encourage caching of your queries and also caching your PHP code. Right? So with this, you can also clear out the cache. It's a nice little backend tool. Right? So now let's talk about caching plugins. Right? So that's where we're going here with this. Who's not using a caching plugin on their WordPress install? Okay. You should. It's like printing money. That's why I put this graphic up here, right? It's free, and it's going to save you so much. So this is what we're getting into if you have a shared host, right? The things I talked about before were things that were mostly specific to dedicated hosts. So this is shared. So everybody can do this right now, and I recommend everybody does, right? So the first one out there is probably the most popular solution that's been around for a few years is WP Super Cache. It's got, last I checked, it was close to 1.5 million downloads. Right? And what that does is it creates static pages, like the query cache, where it puts something in the memory and can pull it out, the opcode cache, where it puts the PHP code in the memory and pulls it out. This, when a page gets requested through WordPress, generates HTML flat files, and the next request for that, pull that out of the flat files. So you're really sidestepping all of the other issues, and you're just pulling out these flat files, right? But you're still running PHP to see if it's in the cache or not, so it's important for us to have those steps I talked about before. Now the new kid on the block, it's been out, I don't know, about a year and a half or so, W3 Total Cache. I am in love with this plugin, right? So it does the page caching that's available in WP Super Cache. It also handles object caching for us. That's related to WordPress. The CSS and JavaScript minifying, which are going to help us speed everything else up. So what it does is it strips out white space and kind of compresses everything together and makes the JavaScript and CSS files smaller. So it's quicker for users to download, right? HTTP compression supports that as well. So not only does it turn your pages into HTML, but it will basically also zip them up using gzip, deliver them to the browser where it's then inflated. The users don't see this. Sure.
I was just going to throw out a warning. If you're using this cache and you're minifying the JS and you see some plugins breaking or JavaScript breaking, occasionally it can break the JavaScript. So
Sure,
you have
yeah.
to be careful with the JS.
Anything specific?
I forget which. I think it broke one of my Facebook share plugins once. So
Yeah, definitely. With any plugin, you're going to have to, check your site, and I suggest doing it in a sandbox environment before putting it out on production. Oh yeah. Yes, definitely. So you can turn them all on, turn them all off. These are just options that Total Cache supports, right? And it also supports CDN support. CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. So it'll help you put your file, say, up on Amazon S3, and then the next request for that file will pull down through Amazon S3, thus relieving your web server from having to deliver that file.
So would it actually rewrite your native theme URLs to the images and?
Yes, I believe it's the image files that you upload into your posts.
Yeah.
So yes, I believe that it will upload those to an S3 account, and then
And there will be an interface where you actually specify your AWS keys and
Correct.
And it will just take it and put it in the bucket.
yes. So there's so many options with this. I mean,
Is your PowerPoint presentation going to be available?
yeah, I'm gonna put this all online. Right? Sure.
On the Studio Press Genesis showcase, there's a site called Barbecue Lovers.
I'm one of the ones that's not great at designing them, right? But since everything's open, anybody can upload them or put them online and say, hey, here's a WordPress thing, go and download it, right? So that in itself means that they're not all created equal. So there's some things that you should look for in a theme, some warning signs, right? One, the number of CSS and JavaScript files they're getting included, right? Are they including just everything in a bunch of separate files? Are they using something that's a standard library like jQuery, or is it something that they've homebrewed themselves? So that's something that you might want to look at. Are these files minified, like out of the box? Are they bloated? Are they full of comments and things like that, or has the author actually went and helped you shrink those things down? If they haven't, I mean, that's what there's plugins for to help you with that, right? So that's not a big thing, but it's something to consider. Now, all the images that are used in the theme, are they optimized? Are they set up properly? Are they using the right file types? We'll talk about that in a second, also why that's important. And also, is the code optimized? Are they making all kinds of database calls and all these sorts of things that don't matter? They're bogging down your site. So you can have a pretty slick site that's running great. You switch your themes, and it starts slowing things down because it starts to include all these fancy things. I see a lot of this in the premium themes you purchase, but there's a lot of premium themes out there that are awesome, right? So if you have something like the Thesis theme or some of the stuff through Woo themes, this generally isn't the case, right? So I suggest doing your homework, and sometimes you pay for what you get.
What do you think about Headway?
I'm not familiar with Headway.
You have to see after 1.7. You have to do it.
Sure, see, there's stuff like that. Okay, so do your homework. go out there, find some demo sites that are running the theme that you're interested in, test it on a local server, do these sorts of things before you turn it on live to everyone else, right?
What are your thoughts on the thesis theme?
I like the thesis theme. It's pretty good. You know, I use it for a lot of my clients. I like the back end for it. For people that aren't extremely technical, there's a lot of resources available for it, and there's a lot of options to help somebody tweak their site out and become pretty effective with it right away. I really like their hook system, and yeah, as far as not having to get into the code to do a lot of things, it's nice.
Have you looked at WordPress Genesis?
I haven't looked at Genesis.
Current,
Yeah, I've used some StudioPress stuff in the past, but not in the last year or so since they've moved to that all-in-one like kind of backend. Okay, so I was talking about images and how they're important for some of the speed. Okay, so again, how many are you loading? Because everything that you load on the page has to be downloaded to the user. So if you have a site that's crazy heavy with images, that might be one of the reasons why your site appears slow. Okay, but there's things that you can do to help that. So optimizing your images. Photoshop has a save to web option. If you're using Photoshop, I suggest you use the save to web option. If you're not, you don't have access to that, there's other facilities that you can say upload your images to through some of these sites. They'll optimize it and send it back to you, right? So you can download it from there. And you want to make sure you're using the right file type. Like you don't want to be using JPEGs for everything on the site. You use those for images and things that are heavy with gradients. Just be mindful of those sorts of things, right? You want to make sure the file is uploaded in the appropriate size. Sure.
So it's in JPEG, which you're using.
Well, it depends on what you're using. If it's like line art or something, PNG files are awesome. Yeah, GIF files, GIF are good. And, depending on the amount of colors and transparency and those sorts of things, you'll want to choose one of those.
By line art, you mean just like site logo or something?
Yeah, like site logo, something that's drawn, something that's animated, something that's not a photo or heavy with gradients, basically. Right?
If you downsized it, is it okay to use the WordPress media library interface just to change the pixel dimensions?
Yeah. I'm going to talk about that right now. So,
just don't downsize it.
Right, yeah, so it's really easy to take a photo from your camera and upload it, and depending on your settings, you just uploaded some 3 meg file, and you want to display that to the user for some photo gallery you're doing. It's going to be pretty heavy. WordPress is nice, and it will scale things down. They're small, medium, large sizes, but maybe that doesn't fit your theme. That doesn't fit the content of your window. So they give you the option on the side to choose the percentage, right? So say you upload it and you choose the large one, and you preview the page and it's too large, and you go, I want to drop that down to 80%, right? At that point, you're still downloading that large image, and inside the code, it's scaling it down. So that's wasted, in my opinion, that's wasted space, right? So there's always the option for the user to click the image and you can display the large version of it, but scaling it down using the percentages on the side, that's just a gotcha, right? So if you're doing 1 or 2, it's not going to kill you, everything in moderation, but if you're depending on that for your site, you might want to rethink it, okay? Also, content delivery networks for heavy images. I mentioned this a little bit ago, but using one of these plugins or manually doing that, uploading things to Amazon S3, servers that aren't your own, download these image contents, it removes the load from your server because the request isn't coming from your server to the user. They're downloading it from somewhere else.
Is that like putting all of your photos on Flickr and then just putting the link in?
Yeah, Flickr would be an example of a content delivery network. I don't know if I would define it as such. Something like
It accomplishes the same thing.
It accomplishes the same thing in a roundabout way. Something like Amazon S3 will actually, you can obscure the URL so that if you were interested in, so it could be like images.mysite.com or something along those lines. So that's a benefit, and they're often quicker. Yeah, they're designed for speed. That's their whole purpose. Yeah, exactly. So things like Akamai will cache things in a specific region. So say you're in California, you're going to pull it off a California server, not someplace in Europe.
Now you can get that with S3's Amazon's CloudFront,
Yes.
which is now doing it throughout the world.
Yeah, that's a new feature that they released this year.
Yes.
Okay. I think there's a question back here.
Do you have a plugin that'll resize in WordPress, like a good one, you would recommend?
Yeah, it's built into WordPress. Like I said, when you upload an image, it'll pick the sizes for you. But I like to do things by hand. I'm sure somebody here might know a plugin that would do that. I don't off the top of my head. Right? Okay, so here's a practical example of images. Right. So here we go. This is the WordCamp for this year's logo, and here's one right next to it. Who can tell a visual difference between the two? Right? Okay, so let's look at this. One on the left, 131K. It's JPEG, right? One on this side, 4 kilobytes. So, right? There's huge difference there. Huge difference there. So make sure that your themes are set up with the right, graphics is going to be huge. So say you have a bunch of stuff, you can have a meg worth of graphics easily in your theme, and you can press it down probably, under 20, 30K if you do it right. Right? And then you start caching things on top of that, we really see a speed up. Sure.
Have you ever heard of lazy loads?
Lazy loading images?
Well, you lazy loads, jQuery,
Sure.
And then if you have a long page, lots of images, it'll only load the ones that are visible.
Yeah, Mashable uses that.
So then, as you scroll down, it'll still fade in or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you have a megabyte of images as well, it'll only load them.
Sure. I'm talking more about themes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was actually asked about similar where
Widgets like on the side, you're dragging into your theme and set them up. A lot of people use them for third-party interaction, like Twitter streams or Facebook things like that, right? So these are what I call third-party content widgets, right? So it's a question of how many of those are you loading, right? And the reason for that is your speed depends on their speed, right? So if you're connecting to, say, Flickr to pull in your latest photo stream, your site is going to load those images from there. Now let's face it, perception is reality, right? So it might not be your server, you could have your server tuned to the max, and you're pulling in all this content from other places, and if the images aren't loading in a timely manner, or you're relying on some JavaScript that's calling off to some third-party thing like pulling in your Twitter stream, it's going to make your site look slow, right? So it's really important, I think, when it comes to these widgets, to really figure out what you need. Again, everything in moderation. Instead of throwing the kitchen sink at it, it's going to make your site look slow if you're pulling in a lot of stuff, say from Facebook and things along those lines. I have some slides to show that in a minute. And often it increases Flash and JavaScript dependencies, so it just makes things heavy, right? So keep it lean and mean. Okay? And the same things apply to plugins, right? There's plugins out there to do everything. People talking about, is there one to help resize images and things? And my philosophy is just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So you can load every single plugin that WordPress has available out, but it's probably not going to do anything good, right? It's a performance choking point for a lot of sites, right? So your plugins are crucial. We all rely on plugins. And again, plugins are created open source by authors, and nobody's created equal. There's some good plugins out there, there's some bad plugins. And okay, so my question when I ask myself is, do I really need this plugin, right? Is it really adding a lot of value? Is it something that I can hard code in my theme? Is it something that I can, do some in another way, right? Do I really need all these extra database calls? And I have listed here, increases third-party dependencies. What I mean by that is twofold. So you might be calling out to one of these third-party services, like I talked about with widgets, or I'm also talking about relying on the plugin author. It's real easy to install plugins. You do it right from the back end. Same with upgrades. Oh, hey, there's a new version, you should upgrade. Cool, and you click it. You don't know what's been added, you don't know what's been changed. The plugin could be broken, it could be a lot slower. Hopefully it's an improvement, but without any real QA behind it, who knows, right? So here's a case study of a buddy of mine who found out that I was going to be speaking here, and he said, hey, could you look at my site? It's kind of slow, right? It was loading in 11 seconds, right? So I looked through it, and he was using this plugin called Yet Another Related Post Plugin, and it was an old version of it, and it was cruising through, and basically from analyzing them and checking this stuff out, I found that it was searching through the text of every single post, looking for keywords. So, there's just massive amounts of queries. Sure, he was on a shared host, he didn't have these other server performance things, he didn't have any caching plugins installed. And just by disabling that plugin was really, do you really need this? It's really crippling your site. sure, this would be nice, but it'd be nicer to have the site load for users, right? So just by disabling it, we got it down to 4 seconds, right? So that's huge, right? Look at that percentage gain, right? I mean, what is that? You know, who would like that kind of percentage gain in their daily income, you know? Right?
Once he's taking load off the shared resource.
Exactly, right?
So slow.
It's so slow, yeah, sure, like I said, you didn't have these caching things installed, so, you know, it can definitely get better from there, but, I mean, that's definitely the choking point, it's just one plugin. Load balancing, getting multiple machines involved, so when one's busy, the next one can take over, right? So it's kind of like a tag team match. I've heard a lot of people talking about HT access tweaks, specifically for Apache, like improving the rewrite rules, so they're a bit quicker. I mean, that's a very fine-grained tweak, but if you're into squeezing everything out of WordPress that you can get, that's a place. Loading jQuery from Google, we talked about that in the last session. So that's again kind of like using a CDN. It's pulling out content from a fast server that's not your own. So you know, we know jQuery is a bulky library to start with, but it's needed for a lot of themes and plugins. So why not load it from somewhere else that's not your server and it's reliable? And also there's tweaks you can do to the WordPress config file itself. Some things like defines, so it doesn't always have to look up what your database, what your site's name is or the URL. And you just Google for those and find those. I'm not going to go into those now. Okay? So let's talk about measuring performance from the browser. There's a lot of tools out there to measure performance on the server side, but let's focus on the front side here. And my first recommendation is the Firefox browser itself. Right? It has a lot of tools and a lot of ability to get a lot of plugins that are going to help you along the way. One I like to use is called Lori. It's the Life of Request Info plugin. It will display at the footer of the page, a little status bar at the bottom, how long it took for your server to respond, how long it took for the files to be delivered, and how many requests were made. So a request isn't a page. A request is how many times things had to be downloaded from the server. So your JavaScript files, it would be one hit. Your CSS files, another hit. Your little logo of yourselves a hit. So one page could have 100 different requests to it, right? So it's good to reduce those numbers of requests. Question back.
Which is one thing you didn't bring up earlier, is using sprites for all your images, which decrease your HTTP requests.
Yeah. So
Can you repeat what you said?
sure. Using sprites in your themes for requests. Like I said, if you're every file you download from the server is a request. If you can mash all of your theme backgrounds into one file and then move that file around using CSS to display what's needed, it's only one request to your server. So you can have 100 little widgety background logos or icons, and you just move those around using CSS, and it's one request to your server to download that file. Okay? So the Firebug plugin is a must. If you're developing out there, WordPress site, get Firefox and the Firebug plugin, right? The Net tab inside of Firebug is an indispensable tool. We're going to see an example of that. YSlow is a plugin from Yahoo that plugs right into Firebug, and it will help you figure out why your site's slow and give you some recommendations. Google's jumped in recently and released Google Speed, which does the same thing. It analyzes your content and the makeup of your site and gives you recommendations based on that. Right? And of course, there's advanced tools for checking the performance of your server itself. These are just recommendations for what you can do inside of WordPress. Okay? So let's look at some examples here. So this is what the Net tab looks like inside of Firebug. So this is coming off my site. See, I'm pulling stuff in from Flickr, from Google, some Google Ad stuff down here. The size of it, and then also the timeline, like how it came in like a waterfall, right? So how it stacked things up and how it brought them in, and the times associated with that. So it's a quick way, just by turning this on and looking inside the Net tab, to see what are the beasts that are being loaded, right? So look at this, like we're loading there. What is that? That's jQuery at 70 kilobytes, and you can see it's taking 463 milliseconds to load there, right? So here's the second load of the page, right? Just a refresh, and this is what my browser's cached, right? So there's caches inside your browser also. We've all seen that. Oh, clear your cache. It's not showing up for me. Okay, well, clear your cache. There it is, right? So here you can see 304 means that it's been in the cache. And this is a good way to see what's being downloaded every time the page gets requested. And you can see that it's pulling these Flickr photos, right? I've not seen these Flickr photos before, so these are getting downloaded every single time. So that might be something that I want to look at disabling, right? And things like the Google Ads and some of their logging facilities for analytics. Of course, those are things I want to load every single time, right? So I'll let those ones slide. But we can see now that instead of 400 milliseconds, we got 79 milliseconds, right? So it's good. This is all being done in the browser cache. This is nothing that I've done on the back end, because of course the user has to download the file to get to it, right? So this is a nice way to just kind of look around and analyze your site just to see what's going on just inside Firebug. And you can use this on anybody's site, right? So if you're interested, you can load up your favorite site and look at what CNN is doing, how they're streaming stuff. Okay, so this is YSlow. Again, I loaded up the WordCamp 2010 site. Oh, I'm sorry, this is Google Speed, and ran it through here. You just do a speed test basically on it. And what's that? You got a 70 out of 100, right? Don't. I'm going to prove a point here in a second, right? So it's gonna give you some suggestions here, like your CSS could be minified better. You could be serving content from another domain, like a consistent URL, so it doesn't have to do DNS lookups. The browser doesn't have to do a DNS lookup every time. And then some warning things like combining all your CSS into one file or your JavaScript all into one file. And then it gives you some check marks on things that are good. And just gives you an overall score. And clicking on one of these is going to go straight to a Google page that explains what it means and gives you some pointers on how to improve it. Right? So it's a pretty useful tool. You load it up and you go, wait, I'm getting a bad mark on that. What does that mean? Right? Question? No, this isn't Lori. This is Google Speed. Right? It also plugs into the Firebug plugin. So it's a plugin for a plugin. It's a pretty neat concept. Right? Okay, so moving over, this is YSlow. Okay, YSlow gives you a letter grade. So pulling up here, you got an E. Right? Yeah, it goes all within scale, right? So here's some things that what they're recommending. We got this list over here, and clicking on it again will give you a description. And there's some rules here. So I have it set up right now for a small site or a blog because that's what it is, right? This isn't CNN, this isn't Mashable, and this is where it's coming back. So it's not that bad, right? It just shows you points of improvement, and that's what we're looking for here, right? So, like I said, to not be picky here, I loaded up Mashable. Mashable's also got an E, right? Which is surprising. But here, I've changed the rules to, they're more strict rules. Like, this isn't a small site or a small blog, by no means. Mashable's a huge site, tons of traffic, right? So using that set of rules, look at the things that they can be improved on. Improving things from the CDN, adding explorations to the header, putting JavaScript at the bottom. So, you might load up your site and go, man, I'm getting a horrible grade here. It's all in moderation, right? Sure.
I was wondering, where can I get more information on reducing DNS lookups?
Reducing DNS lookups, that's a nice way of saying keep everything on the same domain, so it doesn't have to go out and connect to other things.
Right.
So,
but isn't that kind of what you're doing with CDNs? If you're like loading.
right. Okay. So let's do it right now. Okay. Let's see. Let's see what YSlow says. So these are great tools. You can have an auto run each time. I don't like to do that because when I'm surfing the web, I'm not always interested in this. Okay, they got an A. So Yahoo gives them an A. Okay? But look at this, it's the content delivery network, and they get an E, and the expired headers, they get a D. Other than that, they got A's down the line. So sure, like expired headers, we can click on that, and it's going to give us an example of the files that they're talking about. Like these don't have, these aren't set to cache way out into the future. Yeah, SpriteMe, I think it's SpriteMe.org. I think so. I think both of them will connect you, but it's a great tool.
It'll basically run through all your images on your page and create an export as Sprite, and you have to tweak it a bit.
Yeah.
It's take that and do it all in Photoshop.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some sessions on the development track. The other track that's going to cover stuff like that. Y'all in the back.
Is there a rule of thumb for how heavy, you should keep a site under, or how quickly, you aim for getting things to load?
Let me pull my slide here because that's where I'm going next with this. Right? So let me get there in a second, right? Get through this. So in summary, hosting matters. Okay, so your site could be slow because of your host. It could be how things are set up on your host, right? So if you have the bandwidth and the availability for it, move to a virtual or dedicated server. Helps optimize that server, and if you need to, hire a good sysadmin to help get you there, right? Because that's going to go really far, right? Cache everything possible, your queries, your code, your pages, your images, put things out on CDNs. Use a quality theme, something that's going to be built for speed. It's built to do what you need it to do. Okay? Again, now you only use what you need. Right? Only load the plugins that you need. Only load the widgets that you need. Keep it light. Keep it thin. Okay? Be mindful of your third-party connections. If you're connecting to Google and Facebook and Flickr and all these other things, of course it's going to slow down your site. You're relying on all those other people that aren't your site, things that you don't have control over. Yeah. Okay, so again, Firefox and Firebug are awesome, and everything in moderation. So getting to your question about the speed, it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? So if you want a site that's real snappy, sure, 20, 30K, but if it's a new site, you're including images, and it's important for you to plug in those Flickr and Facebook streams, you're going to go over that. So everything in moderation, right? And I guess they didn't have that slide, or it's in there. But Mashable was loading 1.7 megabytes on their homepage. So put that in contrast. You look at it and you go, Mashable's not a slow site. It's probably because they have the server on the back end tweaked really hard. Okay? So there it is. Hopefully you guys can speed up some of your sites with some of the things we covered today. Yeah.
Website will look at your CSS and find the use cases.